The billionaire's laughter echoed through the golden-lit restaurant, cutting through the clinking glasses and quiet piano music like a blade. Everyone knew who he was. Victor Langston, the man who owned half the city and treated the other half like dust under his shoes. Tonight was his private celebration. Another deal closed, another company devoured. At the corner, a young black waitress moved quietly between tables, her name tag barely visible under the harsh shimmer of the chandeliers. Her name was Alicia. To most of the guests, she was invisible, a shadow with a tray. But Victor saw her, not as a person, but as a joke waiting to happen. When Alicia accidentally dropped a napkin near his chair, he smirked and held up a crystal glass filled with red wine. "Tell you what," he said loud enough for everyone to hear, his tone dripping with arrogance. "You solve this," he pointed at the complex math puzzle on his phone screen, "and I'll give you everything you want." The room fell silent. Even the pianist stopped mid-note. Alicia looked up, her eyes steady. She didn't say a word. She simply reached for the phone, and what happened next would leave Victor Langston questioning everything he thought he knew about power, privilege, and worth. Alicia's fingers hovered above the billionaire's phone, her reflection trembling faintly in the glossy screen. Around her, murmurs rippled through the crowd, laughter from some, disbelief from others. Victor leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smirk stretching wide across his sharp face. He expected hesitation, a stammer, maybe even fear, but Alicia said nothing. She only wiped her hands on her apron, glanced at the puzzle, and began tapping. Victor's tablemates, investment partners, politicians, and media figures exchanged amused looks. The youngest one whispered, "Does she even know what she's doing?" Victor chuckled. "Let her try," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. Sometimes humility is best taught through experience. The puzzle wasn't random. It was an advanced algorithmic riddle designed to calculate compound interest over shifting variable rates, something Victor himself had used years ago to outsmart an entire investment firm. It had taken his top analysts hours to solve. Alicia took 20 seconds. Her thumb slid across the screen with confident precision. Lines of data reformed. Numbers balanced. The phone beeped. Solved. For a second, silence hung heavy. Then gasps. One of the partners leaned forward, whispering, "That's impossible." Victor froze. The smirk drained off his face. He checked the screen again. The result was flawless. Alicia placed the phone back on the table gently. "You said you'd give me everything I want," she said softly, not as a challenge, but as a reminder. He stared at her. "What do you want exactly?" Her lips trembled for a brief second, not from fear, but from something deeper. "A chance," she said. It wasn't the answer he expected. It wasn't money, fame, or favor. Just a chance. Victor gestured to a seat. "Sit." The restaurant staff froze, unsure whether to intervene or watch. Alicia hesitated but obeyed. The billionaire who never dined with anyone beneath his status now sat across from a waitress, the hum of whispered conversations building like static around them. "You studied math?" he asked. "I studied data science," she replied. "Graduated top of my class. Couldn't find work after? Well, after my last interview." Victor arched a brow. "And why's that?" Her voice grew quieter. "Because my name doesn't sound like theirs." That silenced even the laughter at nearby tables. The pianist resumed playing softly, as if trying to cover the tension that wrapped around them like smoke. Victor didn't respond. Instead, he stared at the phone again, at the solution she had cracked effortlessly. He wanted to dismiss it as luck, coincidence, or a fluke. But deep down, he knew brilliance when he saw it. "Bring her resume tomorrow," he said finally, forcing nonchalance into his tone. "Let's see if your chance can survive the morning." Alicia stood, her expression unreadable. "It will," she said, turning to walk away. That night, as Victor watched her disappear into the back corridor, he felt something unfamiliar stir in him. Not admiration, not yet, but discomfort. The kind of unease that comes when arrogance meets undeniable truth. He had built an empire believing talent followed privilege. That night, a waitress with steady eyes and calloused hands had cracked through his illusion with nothing more than logic and grace. The next morning, before sunrise, Victor's mind was already replaying the moment. The sound of the phone beeping, the shift in the room, the way Alicia hadn't smiled when she won. It haunted him. He didn't know it yet, but that single moment of humiliation would soon unravel everything he thought he controlled. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the glass towers of Langston Enterprises like liquid gold. The city was already awake, taxis honking, news screens flashing stock updates, and somewhere in that chaos, Alicia stood outside the massive glass doors, clutching a folder that contained her resume, a recommendation letter from her old professor and hope. She had barely slept. Her hands were still trembling, not from fear but from disbelief. Last night's scene replayed over and over in her mind. The billionaire's smug smile, the stunned silence, the subtle shift in power. She didn't want revenge. She wanted a chance to prove that brilliance didn't need permission from privilege. Inside, Victor Langston's office sat atop the 72nd floor, carved out like a shrine to wealth, glass walls, black marble floors, and a skyline that made everyone else look small. He sat behind a mahogany desk, scrolling through market data. But when his assistant announced Alicia's arrival, he paused. He didn't expect her to show up. Most people would have backed down, thinking last night was just a performance. But she had come, punctual, poised, and quietly determined. "Send her in," he said. Alicia stepped inside, her reflection stretching across the polished floor. Victor studied her as if assessing an investment, one with unpredictable returns. "You really came," he said finally. "You told me to bring my resume," she replied. He gestured for her to sit. "You're brave. Or stubborn? Maybe both." There was no arrogance in her tone, only quiet resolve. He liked that, though he'd never admit it. He glanced through her resume. Her credentials were real. A degree in data science, top marks, a completed internship at a small analytics firm. But then a gap. 2 years of unexplained silence. "What happened here?" he asked, pointing. Alicia exhaled. "My internship ended right before the company's acquisition. I applied everywhere afterward. Had interviews, good ones. Until the calls stopped." "Why?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Because I stopped fitting the image they wanted. I walked into boardrooms where they expected someone else. Someone not me." Victor didn't interrupt. For the first time, he wasn't listening to win. He was listening to understand. He leaned back. "Do you believe in merit?" "Yes, even in a world that doesn't." She met his gaze. "Especially in that kind of world." He almost smiled. "You'll start today," he said. "Trial period." "No promises," she nodded. "That's all I need." By noon, Alicia was seated at a long table in the data operations department, surrounded by people who looked at her with curiosity and thinly veiled skepticism. They had seen her name appear on the internal chat. Temporary analyst. "Personal hire by Mr. Langston." Whispers followed her wherever she went. Some admired her audacity. Others resented it, but none offered help. Her first task was a challenge. A real-time analytics problem involving algorithmic irregularities in the company's trading software. It was complicated, layered, and laced with deliberate traps, something that could take a team of analysts a week. Victor was testing her. Alicia rolled up her sleeves, her eyes scanning through thousands of data points. Her old laptop had been replaced with a company machine, faster, cleaner. She typed with calm precision, lips moving silently as she traced patterns others missed. Hours passed. By evening, her monitor displayed what no one else had seen. The flaw wasn't in the algorithm itself. It was a line of hidden code designed to manipulate trading delays in favor of insider accounts. It wasn't a bug. It was corruption. She printed the report, walked straight to Victor's office, and placed it on his desk. "What's this?" he asked. "Your problem," she replied softly. "Someone inside your company is rigging your trades." He frowned, skimming the data. The evidence was undeniable. Timestamps, variables, altered logs. His jaw tightened.
You're sure?
Yes, and I know who. Victor looked up sharply. Who? She hesitated. Your senior analyst, Mr. Drusen. For a moment, the office felt colder. Drusen had been with him for 10 years. Trusted. Loyal. Victor pressed a button on his desk phone. Get Drusen here, now. When the man entered, tall, confident, gray at the temples, he greeted Victor with a smile. You wanted to see me, sir? Victor didn't return it. Alicia found something. He slid the report across the table. Explain this. Drusen's face paled. This is a misunderstanding, is it? Victor's voice sharpened. Alicia said nothing. She simply watched. Under pressure, Drusen cracked faster than Victor expected. It was temporary, just offsets, I swear. No harm done. No harm? Victor's hand slammed the desk. You've been bleeding my company for months. Security entered moments later. Drusen's pleas echoed as he was escorted out, his voice fading down the corridor. When silence returned, Victor turned to Alicia. You just saved me millions, she shook her head. I just did my job. He studied her, the same woman who last night carried trays between tables, the same one his guests had mocked. And now she had exposed the very corruption that could have destroyed his empire. Something inside him shifted. Respect. Uneasy, reluctant respect. He stood walking toward the window where the skyline burned orange in the fading sunset. You know, he said quietly, I've spent years thinking people like you needed saving, but maybe it's me who needed waking up. Alicia didn't reply. She just looked at the city lights, each one a life, a dream, a fight. In that moment, the billionaire who thought he owned everything realized he had never truly understood worth. That evening, the city skyline shimmered under the fading sun, but inside Langston Enterprises, the air was heavy, charged with rumor, disbelief, and fear. What Alicia had uncovered spread through the building like a quiet storm. Emails were whispered, doors were shut, and people who once ignored her now avoided her gaze altogether. By morning, it was no longer a secret. The story broke across major financial networks. Insider scandal at Langston Enterprises, senior analyst accused of trade manipulation. Within hours, reporters crowded the company's glass entrance, flashing cameras at every employee who dared to exit. Inside his top-floor office, Victor Langston sat motionless, staring at the news ticker crawling across his screen. His empire, the one he had built with ruthless precision, now teetered on the edge of disgrace. Alicia stood silently near the doorway, clutching a printed statement. She had been summoned, again. But this time the air between them was different. They're calling it negligence, Victor muttered, rubbing his temples. They're saying I knew. You didn't, she said softly. He looked up. Doesn't matter. Perception is truth in my world. He stood and paced toward the window, the city lights flickering across his face. You could have gone to the press yourself, he said. Why didn't you? Alicia met his eyes. Because I wasn't trying to destroy you. I was trying to be seen. Those words hit harder than he expected. For the first time in his career, he felt something he couldn't quantify or control. Guilt. He turned toward her. They want me to make a statement. Step down temporarily. The board's meeting in an hour. Then tell the truth, she said. Victor frowned. The truth doesn't win sympathy. It wins respect, she replied. And sometimes that's louder. An hour later, the boardroom was filled with the kind of tension that only money and fear can create. 12 men and women, each holding the power to end his career, sat in silence as Victor entered. Cameras from internal media streamed the meeting, a controlled broadcast to investors and employees worldwide. Victor adjusted the mic, his gaze steady but haunted. Langston Enterprises has always stood for innovation, he began. But innovation means nothing without integrity. A crime was committed inside this company, one that betrayed our clients and our principles. He paused. I take responsibility for allowing a culture where arrogance blinded accountability. Murmurs rippled across the room. No one had expected him to say it. And it took someone I once overlooked, he continued, glancing toward the back where Alicia stood among the staff, to remind me what leadership actually means. Every camera turned to her. Alicia froze, not in fear, but in disbelief. Victor's tone softened. Miss Alicia Hayes discovered the breach. She didn't have power. She didn't have influence, but she had courage. And that's worth more than every title in this room. Gasps. Silence. A few uneasy shifts in chairs. The speech that was supposed to save Victor's reputation had turned into something far deeper. When the broadcast ended, investors didn't see weakness. They saw accountability, something rare in his world. The company's stock stopped falling, but the real change wasn't in the market. It was in the man himself. That night, after the cameras dimmed and the hallways emptied, Victor found Alicia on the rooftop terrace, standing alone, wind whipping through her hair as the city buzzed below. "You know," he said, stepping beside her, "I built this empire believing I could buy brilliance. But you reminded me it can't be bought, only recognized." She looked at him, her voice quiet. "Recognition is a start. But it's not the finish line," he smiled faintly. "Then help me finish it." "What do you mean?" He turned to her fully. "I'm starting a new division, focused on diversity-driven innovation. You'll lead it. Build your own team, your own rules." Alicia blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "You're serious?" "As serious as a man who's finally learning." For the first time since they met, she smiled, not from pride, but from relief. The world hadn't changed overnight, but one man's arrogance had cracked open enough to let the light in. Below them, cameras still flashed outside the building, reporters shouting theories, headlines twisting every word. But up here, amid the noise, something real had shifted, an awakening that couldn't be undone. Victor extended his hand. "You said you wanted a chance. I'm giving you more than that. I'm giving you a platform." She looked at his hand, then the city, and finally back at him. "Then I'll make sure others get one too." As they stood against the skyline, the billionaire and the waitress who had rewritten the narrative, the wind carried the faint hum of the world moving forward, one story at a time. He glanced at her one last time before walking away. "You solved more than a puzzle, Alicia. You solved me." Weeks turned into months, and the world that once mocked a waitress for daring to think beyond her place now whispered her name in admiration. Alicia Hayes, the woman who had solved the billionaire's challenge, had become a symbol, not of luck, but of resilience. Under her direction, Langston Enterprises' new division, the Horizon Initiative, began hiring people like her, overlooked talent, ignored resumes, unseen brilliance. The office that once echoed with corporate vanity now pulsed with new energy, ideas from voices that had never been heard before. Alicia didn't change the world overnight. But she changed the rules of one empire, and that was enough to start a ripple. Victor Langston watched from his office. Window one morning as the team Alicia had built presented their first major innovation, a predictive data model for equitable investment opportunities. It was groundbreaking, not because it made money, but because it redirected it into communities that had always been left behind. He leaned back in his chair, almost smiling. For once, profit wasn't the only measure of success. Later that day, Alicia walked into his office, confident, composed, wearing the same calm dignity she had that night in the restaurant. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. Victor nodded, motioning for her to sit. "They're calling you a hero," he said. She shrugged. "Heroes fix systems. I just exposed one," he smiled faintly, "and built something better in its place." She looked out the window, her reflection framed against the city. "It's not just me, Victor. It's everyone who never got the chance to sit at this table. I just opened the door." He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. Then maybe that's what power was always supposed to be. Not owning the table, but making room for others to sit. A quiet moment passed between them. Not as billionaire and waitress, not as employer and employee, but as two people who had stood on opposite sides of the same truth and finally met in the middle. That evening, Alicia returned to the same restaurant where it had all begun. The chandeliers still glowed, the piano still played, and new waiters moved between tables carrying trays with careful grace. She sat at the corner, the same spot she once worked from, watching the rhythm of the place. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. When the pianist began a slow, soulful tune, she closed her eyes. In that melody, she heard everything she had fought for. Every insult turned into fuel, every humiliation turned into purpose. Her phone buzzed. A notification. The Horizon Initiative named one of Forbes' top 10 most impactful diversity programs of the year. She smiled. Not out of vanity, but peace. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It whispers. It rebuilds. It teaches quietly that equality isn't charity, it's correction. Meanwhile, across the city, Victor Langston sat in front of a camera for an exclusive interview. The reporter leaned in. "Mr. Langston, what changed you?" He hesitated before answering. "A mirror," he said softly. Her name was Alicia Hayes. The room fell silent. Cameras rolled. And for the first time in his career, Victor's voice trembled slightly. "She reminded me that intellect has no color and dignity doesn't need permission. I once offered her everything if she could solve a puzzle. She did. And what she gave me in return was something I never had. Perspective." That clip went viral, not because of his words, but because of what they represented. The moment a man who once symbolized arrogance publicly bowed to humility. Months later, Alicia visited a community center in her old neighborhood, where children crowded around computer screens, learning coding and math through the Horizon program she helped create. She knelt beside a young girl who looked up at her with wide eyes. "Miss Alicia, is it true you beat a billionaire at his own game?" the girl asked. Alicia smiled gently. "No," she said. "I just reminded him that games don't matter when everyone deserves a turn." The girl grinned. "I want to be like you." "Then don't stop learning," Alicia replied, brushing the girl's braids aside. "Because one day, you'll be teaching me." As she stood, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, catching her badge. Director, the Horizon Initiative. Outside, the city moved as it always had, busy, loud, indifferent. But beneath the noise, a quiet revolution had begun. One built not on outrage, but on awakening, not on power, but on proof. And it had all started with a challenge meant to humiliate, that instead exposed humanity. Alicia often replayed that moment in her mind, the glass of wine, the arrogant smirk, the phone glowing with numbers. It no longer made her angry. It reminded her how far she'd come. Because sometimes fate doesn't knock politely. It spills wine on your apron and dares you to stand up anyway. As she walked home that evening, city lights reflected in her eyes like stars reborn. Reminders that brilliance, no matter where it comes from, will always find a way to shine through the cracks. And somewhere, in the quiet hum of that city, one voice seemed to whisper through the wind, "You solved more than a puzzle, Alicia. You solved me." Final line, emotional takeaway. Racism doesn't vanish when the powerful apologize. It fades when the unseen finally get their chance to prove they were never beneath anyone.